The T-34. How one tank saved Russia and terrified Germany. June 23, 1941. Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history, is just 24 hours old. German Panzer Commander Paul von Kleist's armored division is advancing deep into Soviet territory. They've already destroyed hundreds of obsolete Soviet tanks. Victory seems inevitable. Then his lead panzer crew radios back. Unknown Soviet tank. Heavy armor. We can't penetrate it. Von Kleist orders his tanks to concentrate fire. 5 Panzer III's unload at 800 meters. The Soviet tank keeps moving. They close to 400 meters. The shells are bouncing off. One German gunner later wrote in his diary, "It was like throwing rocks at a fortress that shoots back." That Soviet tank was the T-34. And over the next 4 years, it would become Hitler's worst nightmare. This is the story of how one tank design saved the Soviet Union, terrified the Wehrmacht, and changed armored warfare forever. Let me break down why the T-34 was revolutionary. First, the gun. The T-34 mounted a 76.2 mm F-34 high-velocity gun. In 1941, this was devastating firepower. At 1,000 meters, it could penetrate 61 millimeters of armor. That meant it could destroy any German tank from ranges where German guns couldn't touch it. The Panzer III's 50 mm gun needed to get within 500 meters to have a chance. The Panzer IV's 75 mm short gun was even worse, designed for infantry support, not tank combat. German tankers found themselves outgunned for the first time in the war. Second, the armor. Here's where the T-34 became genius. Soviet engineer Mikhail Koshkin didn't just make the armor thick. He angled it. The front hull was sloped at 60 degrees. Basic physics. When a shell hits angled armor, it has to travel through more material, and it's more likely to deflect. 45 millimeters of armor at 60 degrees was effectively equivalent to 90 millimeters of flat armor. German intelligence officers examined captured T-34's and couldn't believe it. Their report to Berlin stated, "The T-34 is superior to any tank currently in Wehrmacht service." Third, the engine. While German tanks used gasoline engines, the T-34 ran on a V2 diesel. 500 horsepower pushing 26 tons meant a top speed of 53 kilometers per hour. But more importantly, diesel was less flammable than gasoline. A hit to a German tank often meant instant fire. A hit to a T-34's fuel tanks? Much less likely to explode. Range was another advantage. 400 kilometers compared to the Panzer III's 155 kilometers. In the vast expanses of Russia, that mattered. Fourth, the tracks. This sounds boring, but it won battles. The T-34 had wide 500 mm tracks. German tanks had narrower tracks. When the autumn rains turned Russian roads into rivers of mud, what the Soviets called Rasputitsa, German tanks got stuck. T-34's kept moving. When winter came and snow piled 3 feet deep, German tanks froze. T-34's kept moving. One German panzer commander, Otto Carius, who destroyed over 150 Soviet tanks, later wrote, "The T-34 was the best tank of World War II. If the Russians had known how to use it properly from the start, we would never have made it as far as Moscow." But specs alone don't win wars. Production does. And this is where the T-34 became unstoppable. The Soviet strategy. Stalin's chief tank designer, Mikhail Koshkin, designed the T-34 with one philosophy. Simple, reliable, mass-producible. The transmission was crude. Drivers needed a hammer to change gears. The interior was cramped and uncomfortable. The optics were inferior to German ones. There was no radio in early models. Commanders had to use flags. But none of that mattered, because while Germany was building precision-engineered Panthers and Tigers, the Soviet Union was building T-34's by the tens of thousands. The numbers. Let me put this in perspective. Germany produced approximately 6,000 Panther tanks during the entire war. The Soviet Union built 84,000 T-34's. 84,000. At the Tankograd factories in the Urals, workers assembled T-34's in 24-hour shifts. Factory 183 alone produced over 28,000 tanks. Women, teenagers, and elderly workers, everyone worked the production lines. They simplified the design even further as the war progressed. Welding replaced riveting. Cast turrets replaced machined ones. Production time dropped from 8,000 hours per tank to 3,000 hours. Cost dropped from 270,000 rubles to 135,000 rubles. German panic. German tank production couldn't keep pace. Their tanks were marvels of engineering. Over-engineered, actually. The Panther had a better gun, better optics, better transmission. But it cost 3 times as much to build. It required skilled workers Germany didn't have. It broke down constantly. The transmission failed after 150 kilometers on average. Meanwhile, crude T-34's with their hammer-operated gearboxes kept rolling. German Field Marshal Ewald von Kleist stated after the war, "The T-34 was the finest tank in the world. Quantity-wise, they overwhelmed us." There's a famous Soviet saying, "Quantity has a quality all its own." The T-34 proved it. All of this came to a head in July 1943. The Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle in history. The setup: after the disaster at Stalingrad, Hitler needed a victory. German intelligence discovered a massive Soviet salient, a bulge in the front lines around the city of Kursk. Hitler's plan: pincer attack from north and south, trap and destroy the Soviet forces. Germany assembled 780,000 men, 2,700 tanks, and 2,000 aircraft. Every new weapon was there: Tiger I heavy tanks, Panther medium tanks, Ferdinand tank destroyers, Stuka dive bombers. The Soviets knew they were coming. They built 6 defensive lines. They laid over 1 million mines. And they positioned over 5,000 tanks, most of them T-34's. The clash. On July 5, 1943, Germany attacked. The Tigers and Panthers were technically superior to the T-34. The Tiger's 88mm gun could destroy a T-34 at 2,000 meters. A T-34 needed to get within 500 meters to penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor. But for every Tiger, there were 10 T-34's. German tank ace Michael Wittmann described engaging T-34's. "You destroy one, 2 more appear. You destroy those, 4 more appear. They just keep coming." Soviet tactics were brutal but effective. If 5 T-34's encountered 1 Tiger, 3 would attack from the front as decoys. They'd be destroyed. While the Tiger was reloading, 2 T-34's would flank and hit the sides, where the Tiger's armor was weaker. The math of attrition. Germany lost approximately 760 tanks at Kursk. The Soviets lost over 6,000 tanks. By any measure, Germany inflicted more damage. But the Soviets could replace their losses. Germany could not. Soviet factories produced 1,300 T-34's per month. Germany produced 300 Panthers per month at peak production. Every month, the math got worse for Germany. By August 1943, Germany was retreating. They would never launch another major offensive on the Eastern Front. The T-34 had broken the Wehrmacht's back. The T-34 didn't stay static. The T-34/85. By 1944, Germany had improved its tanks. The T-34/76 gun was no longer sufficient. Soviet designers upgraded it to the T-34/85, mounting an 85mm gun. This could penetrate even the Tiger's frontal armor at reasonable ranges. They also redesigned the turret, adding a 3rd crew member. Now there was a dedicated gunner, loader, and commander. Combat effectiveness increased dramatically. The T-34/85 became the standard Soviet tank for the rest of the war. Over 35,000 were built. The drive to Berlin. By 1945, T-34's were rolling through Eastern Europe. They led the assault on Berlin. German defenders, including teenagers and old men, faced waves of Soviet armor. The famous photograph of T-34's in front of the Reichstag symbolizes the end of Nazi Germany. The tank that Germans dismissed in 1941 as inferior Soviet engineering had crushed the Wehrmacht. Post-war dominance. The T-34 didn't retire in 1945. It fought in Korea in the 1950s. It was used in the Six-Day War in 1967. It saw combat in Yugoslavia in the 1990s. Some T-34's were still in service in Yemen in the 2010s, 70 years after they were built. Over 50 countries operated T-34's. It became the most widely used tank in history. Why? Because the Soviet philosophy was right. Simple, reliable, effective. So what's the real lesson of the T-34? It wasn't the best engineered tank. German Panthers had better guns, better optics, better ergonomics. But the T-34 had something more important. It was practical. It could be built by unskilled workers in hastily constructed factories. It could be repaired by 18-year-old conscripts with basic tools. It could operate in conditions that would destroy more sophisticated tanks. And it could be produced by the tens of thousands. In war, the weapon that can actually reach the battlefield in sufficient numbers beats the perfect weapon that never arrives. Germany built technological marvels. The Soviet Union built 84,000 T-34's. And that's why Russian tanks rolled into Berlin in 1945. Here's my question for you. In modern warfare, do we make the same mistake? Do we build small numbers of incredibly expensive, complex weapons? Or should we focus on simple, mass-producible systems? Drop your answer in the comments. And tomorrow, Part 2 drops. The fatal flaw that killed thousands of T-34 crews. The design compromise that Soviet tankers paid for with their lives. This is War Gear USA, where we break down history's greatest war machines.